So it's a real treat for us, even though, again, Frank and Jerry are the genesis of this whole agriculture conference that we do, but I still consider it a treat to have Frank speak to us each time he comes. So please enjoy Frank Todd's presentation.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here with you. Actually, right now, it's a real pleasure to be anywhere. Like Jerry and some of the other guys here, I'm having some health issues. So if I sound a little bit slow and you don't understand exactly what I'm saying, it's because I just had my throat cut again, all the way from here to here, and it's taking out a lot of nerves. So if you don't understand what I'm saying, you say something, so and I'll try to be a little bit clearer. But I thought we'd spend a little bit of time today to talk about global warming or climate change or whatever you want to call it, and how it impacts the creatures, in fact, it impacts the planet itself. And all of this stuff, everybody here probably knows, but maybe you've never seen it put together in a single package. So we'll see if that works. I gave a talk similar to this last year in Florida, and I was pretty debilitated then as well. I'm suffering the side effects of the chemo treatment, which is really unpleasant. The disease itself is probably easier to handle. So last year when I gave a talk, I looked like this, if I can find the right button here. It's close to...
On the right side of that circle.
There. I had no idea. The camera was even there. I didn't have a clue. I was so far out of it. So whacked, which is pretty much the way I am right now. The camera knew exactly what was going on. And then when it came time for the surgery, of course I had my good friend Hyena showing everybody exactly where the surgery was going to make his cut, basically. So the creatures knew there was something going on, and at least for me, it makes life a little bit simpler. So anyway, let's take a look at some of these phenomena that are occurring now. And this is, by the way, we think of this as something new. It's not anything new. Even this stage that we're in right now, it's probably been going on for 50 years. And we're only at the stage now where we can recognize that these changes are in fact occurring. And of course, all different kinds of ice. Here you can see Trumpers one trying to get through ice, so we would call this thin ice. You can have thicker ice, as you see here with the golden ice. You can have slippery ice, and you can have this kind of ice. Remember now, when we talk about ice, we're talking about two different types of ice. We're talking about sea ice, or saltwater ice, and freshwater ice, which is, we say that for freshwater ice, we're talking generally glacial ice, which is obviously fresh snow over time. But all of these different kinds of ice characteristics, or types of ice, have an impact on the environment and the lives of the creatures that live there. When the sea starts to freeze, it looks like this. It's called pancake ice, as you see. And then later, it becomes what we call fast ice. And it's a solid mass of ice, often attached fast to land, where there's an ice front, such as a floating ice shelf. It's attached fast to that, so hence the name fast ice. And it can be actually quite thick indeed. And you will get, as you can see, icebergs that are actually frozen into that type of ice. Of course, when it breaks up, it becomes something that we call pack ice. You get leaves like this, it starts to crack apart and will split apart, and then you have pack ice. So this is still all sea ice. The reason I mention that, you'll see in just a moment. Can you see this here? This is from the air. See the icebreaker there in the center, and the trail going through it. I spent 16 years on this icebreaker in the ice. So I've had a little bit of experience with ice, and I know a lot of characteristics of ice, and I know how important ice is to many creatures that live, that depend on it. And of course, the times are in fact changing. So here it is. This is a Russian icebreaker, and like I said, this was my home for about 15 or 16 years. So, what kind of animals we're talking about? I just selected some at random. Some we know about, some we may not know a lot about. But this is the pink-footed goose. I put this one in because it's such a nondescript goose and nobody has it, basically. Just very few people keep it, but this is a typical goose of the north. You can see the gander is on guard there. His mate is on the nest, and to protect himself, at least from a visual standpoint, from potential predators, they tend to hunker down on the nest like this. That's very typical of them. And of course, when they hatch off their young and so forth, they do begin to collect together in numbers. In other words, it's called brood merging, and you can have sometimes a flock of 200 or 300 of them. And this occurs at the same time the adults are molting, and when they're obviously molting, they're flightless, so they've got to spend as much time as they can actually in the water, because if not, they're going to be pretty exposed to predation. You can see the blood feathers here are very, very evident, and this is not the time that you actually want to handle these, because if these feathers break off, they bleed quite a bit. But anyway, for about 3 weeks they're going to be flightless, and you find these great massive flocks of them offshore. Pretty impressive. They have, we're talking mostly about small birds at the moment, but there's another goose up there that is quite common, at least it is now. It used to be the barnacle goose, and it's so named for the fact that back in the early days, we're talking about way, way back, when the geese would arrive and disappear at specific times of year, especially when they arrive, the local inhabitants of those areas thought they actually hatched from a goose tree. And they got the impression was the goose barnacle, are you familiar with that? That float around the sea, floats in the chest and so forth, kind of looked like a goose head, goose neck. So that's where the name barnacle goose came from. Anyway, they're not unlike other geese in many ways, but oftentimes you'll find that they'll nest very high. You see them way up on the cliff tip, up with the mirrors and so forth. And the reason for that, of course, is there are many predators that they need to avoid, not the least of which is the wild foxes. There's a lot of them around. So any ace that they possibly can use to survive, they're going to do it. So this is what the young ones look like. Once again, you see the brood merging that we mentioned earlier, and it's, again, quite an impressive sight. We also have brant. This happens to be the black brant. It's another high Arctic nesting goose. This particular picture, the owner was standing right, or the man was standing right next to me and pissing down rain at the ferry. Where were we? The ferry?
Yeah, Port Townsend, 40 miles from here.
And he's saying, why are you standing out there in the rain? None of those pictures will come out. So they'll come out all right. Anyway, you get an idea of specialized feeders. You know, they're feeding now on all, but in the early days, this is a species that tended almost exclusively on eelgrass, and then of course there was a disastrous catastrophe as far as the grass is concerned. It died off for whatever reason, and of course that impacted the brant as well. But they have come back. There's other types of brant. This is the Atlantic one, and then there's a Russian one, and then it has this way there's going to be Melvin Island one, or whatever the name of it is. So the taxonomy of waterfowl is still in a state of flux. This is the light-bellied or the Atlantic brant. Pretty impressive geese. And then the snow geese are pretty impressive as well. This happens to be the greater snow goose. But if we look at snow geese as an indication of what's happening in the climate, they're a difficult species, I think, to really read. They certainly are reflecting the change. I mean, we used to think of snow geese in the millions, maybe 2 million or so, but nowadays, what do they call that? It's the Northern Arctic Goose Group. Is that what's the name of it? You're involved with them, aren't you? The Goose Group, what do they call that? The name of that group? Anyway, all the goose specialists get together, and they put together a model on snow geese, which we know are expanding rapidly, that says, the model says, that there are 28 million snow geese now. Snow, that includes Ross's geese as well. And by the year 2020, there'll be 80 million. Well, I don't believe everything I hear sometimes, and I don't believe half of what I see. But I can tell you that, in my opinion, that those numbers are far greater than all the wild or all the waterfowl in North America put together. So I'm not sure how to respond to that. I'm not a real believer in models anyway, but at any rate, you would think because of global warming that something like a snow goose would be declining, but it is not declining. It may be because their areas that they breed in are becoming snow-free earlier, so they're able to start nesting earlier, and their losses are less than they used to be. But nevertheless, that's a species that definitely is increasing. These pictures actually were taken right out in Maynard's backyard, just about, on a fur island. So there are, how many live here? 200,000?
About 80, 90.
Yeah.
Wrangell Island.
Yeah, so they're pretty impressive to see these great numbers. Anyway, this is what snow geese flock look like. And there are other kinds of geese that don't gather in great numbers and don't migrate great distances. They're going to be impacted in a different way. Here we have emperor goose, and they occur really western Alaska and the Aleutian and over on Siberia, so their range is really quite limited. In fact, they may have, other than the naming, the smallest range of any of the northern geese. And then, of course, we have the northern swans, Hooper in this case, and a lot of these big northern swans are named for their calls. Hooper swan has a very loud, whooping type call. They're quite aggressive. There's no doubt in my mind that I'm about ready to get hammered, and I was. And they have these really wonderful calls, basically because they nest out on the tundra, and they are signaling to any other swans in the area that might want to take to the territory that they're there. And it's probably not a good idea to come and mess around in that particular spot. So there's a group of them chatting, and then trumpeter swan. This is one of the species that's had quite a success story, at least in the lower 48 states, back in the 20s and 30s. They thought there was only like about 69 birds left. There's far more than that now. But that was at the time before they knew about the birds in the north. There was obviously a population in the northern Rockies and up in Canada as well. But they made really quite a comeback. Well, we use this species, as we do with the snow, for example, to point out the importance of different types of habitat. Particularly with migratory waterfowl and shorebirds and so forth. If you're going to actually manage and protect these species properly, you have to be considered the breeding grounds, which in this case would be the high Arctic, the staging areas, those are the areas that they gather in great numbers when they're flying either north or south, and the wintering grounds. So if you don't provide some means of protection for all three of those sites, ultimately you're going to find that that species is probably going to decline. And then the whistling swan, smaller version, I guess, of the hooper that we talked about earlier, is the most numerous of all of the swans, at least in North America. This is the one that changed the name. You've probably heard me harp on this before. I'm not really a believer in DNA and all that sort of thing as a single item for identifying a specific species. They changed the name of whistling swan to tundra swan. Well, a lot of animals live on the tundra, including more than one swan. They call it whistling swan, was named by Lewis and Clark way back in the early days to separate it from the similar appearing, at least from a distance, hooper swan or trumpeter swan, which had a very different call. To me, just changing the name for the sake of changing the name is, to me, it's kind of disgusting because, I mean, it's such an acrobatic named whistling swan, when you know the story behind it. And the DNA analysis that they're using to separate from the Buick swan is probably less than it is from myself or me, or myself with Mike, or myself with Jerry. It's very, very minor indeed. And I think DNA is a great tool for taxonomy, but it's not a great tool if it's the only one you use. You are eliminating zoogeography, behavior, and all that other stuff that goes along with what makes a species. Then you're going to start to make, I think, some serious mistakes. And most people don't speak up. I do. You know, I don't have any axe to grind, anything to prove. But let me just put it this way. I know a whistling swan when I see one, but I'm not sure about a thunder swan. The great thing about them is they don't know that they probably should be wintered in some sort of wintry kind of climate and so forth, but not so. There are these great, big, huge icons of the far north, so to speak, that I can go to my beloved's place in North Carolina in wintertime, and we just drive for an hour and a half, and we have 100,000 of these birds nesting for wintering in the swamps of South Carolina. Pretty impressive. So you wouldn't think, you know, say 50 or 60 or 70 years ago, that if we're going to think about saving or preserving a species like the whistling swan, that we'd have to think about preserving these kinds of wetlands in North Carolina. And then, of course, the staging areas up in Chesapeake Bay, and then further north with the wading grounds as well. But anyway, the good news is the whistling swan seem to be doing quite well. And sites like we just showed you are pretty impressive. And of course, we have lots of different kinds of eiders that are highly specialized. They depend on snow and ice in many ways and so forth. And the changes that are occurring are going to impact them as well. This is the northern eider. It's one of the 6 subspecies of the common eider. And to me, all the eiders are pretty special. We heard somebody talk today about how lumbering the walk of an eider is. I don't find it that way. I find it really quite elegant when they walk, and they have this kind of upright posture and so forth. And they're very agile. You'd be surprised how agile they are. Of course, when the breeding season comes, usually the pairs are still together, or they're forming up on the nesting areas. The eider in some areas, at least common eiders in some areas, do nest colonially in great numbers, such as you see here. And in this case, they haven't laid yet. The males are still there. And then after laying, of course, you get the young eiders, and we all know about eider down, all that sort of thing. And they often are hatched maybe some distance away from salt water, and they'll go to salt water right away. So as soon as they hatch, you'll see the families are on the move, heading off to sea. This is another one subspecies of the common eider. To me, I think one of the most beautiful of all the eiders. The Pacific eider is the largest of the North American duck, about 6 pounds, and you'll see them when you go to Arnold's place for sure. And it's a really large, impressive bird, occurs in the far, far north as far as a breeder. And then the king eider, well, there's little to be said about these creatures in terms of their beauty. You have to really be a specialist when you're designing what a duck should look like. And whoever designed these ducks were drinking pretty heavily. Came up, I think, with some of the most fantastic shapes and colors and behavior of any animal you could possibly imagine. So here they are. They're named king eider because of their fantastic look and so forth. And they don't hold that look year round. As you know, during the summertime they lose all that, because they don't have to maintain this kind of really fancy appearance to attract a mate. And I think that the female king eider is one of the most beautiful of the females, with this very kind of golden brown, and they have a very elegant head shape to them, quite different than the others. Now, you would think of king eiders as being on raging rivers. You think that we should substitute this picture with a harlequin duck, it would be perfect. But nevertheless, here he is. I have to tell you some little bits of tips on how to get some of these pictures. I saw him way, way upriver, and I suspected there was a mate nearby. And was leading a group, of course, I never headed in that direction, and I said, I'll just wait here. Anybody wants to wait down here can do so, and they didn't do it, I was there by myself. So, they started up there, and of course, the male took off, trying to drag the people away, and was coming down the river. So I waited out in the middle of the river, and that bird went by me just 2 feet away. You know, so, and when I was taking it, I was thinking, I gotta show this to Minnie and to Arnold, because they won't believe that this is the type of habitat you find in the north. But nevertheless, this is more like it. Spectacled eiders, again, not all of them have 2 heads, but some of them do. And again, this is, I mean, how bizarre can you make an animal look? I mean, I say that whoever, the real creator, came up with some of these designs is pretty impressive. It's the only waterfowl really where the bill is feathered all the way down to the nostril, such as you see here. And the females, of course, have the vertical spectacles, and even the ducklings at 1 minute of age also show the spectacle. And you can see they're pretty impressive, and you'll see these in the next day or so as well. And of course, in flight, pretty impressive. And I should mention that quite not so many years ago, I think it was in the mid-90s, about 1994, 95, maybe a little earlier than that, they crashed in Alaska. So immediately the idea is that something really is wrong. We have to call it an endangered species. This is risky also, in my opinion, because sometimes basing an opinion on what you're looking at the moment and not having all of the facts. Bottom line is that the majority of the population in Alaska, which was on the UK Delta, Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta, declined by about 80%, maybe 90%, which is huge. But it's only huge in the big picture that those birds have disappeared. It's possible maybe that they've moved, and I think we now have enough data to support the fact that lots of them moved over to Siberia. Well, the big question there is why, and that's what we're going to try to address as we go through this talk a little bit. But nevertheless, back in the mid-90s, and before that, the most pressing, the most exciting piece of information about a species that we did not have dealt with where the spectacled eiders go during the winter time. In other words, where do they winter? We had no idea at all of where they might have gone. And in 1995, actually a friend of mine, a young lady, not so young at that time, but she was a lot younger when I worked with her in the 70s, put transmitters on 22 nesting female spectacled eiders. And at the end of the season, they all took off and so forth, and then they were tracking them, and you'd beep, 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 and then suddenly, not suddenly, but over time, all of the beeps stopped because the batteries ran out. And then, for some unknown reason, about a month later, there was one beep, beep, just one. And they were able to plot it, send out a plane, and discovered that they were nesting, or they were wintering in the middle of the ocean, up around between St. Matthew, St. Lawrence Island, and the Bering Sea. So they've been there all along, and nobody's there. You know, so there's no way you're ever going to see them. But it's amazing that there are probably over 100,000 spectacled eiders here. This is after they've already been declared an endangered species by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. In Siberia, there's a lot of them over there as well, so we really don't know. And the same thing also with the spectacled eiders. They disappeared from Alaska at the same time, and for a reason, once again, unknown. This is a much smaller bird than a normal eider. They're more like a dabbling duck than they are an eider. Pretty impressive bird indeed. I saw many of them when I was in Siberia. Almost all of them, even the Siberian birds, returned to Alaska in the wintertime, in the winter down at Eisenbach, places like that. And despite the fact that their numbers are way down in Alaska, I'm not really totally convinced that they are deserving of a endangered species status. Because if you start putting titles on something that where it's not warranted, well, then when it comes time to have a species where it really is warranted, it's going to be more difficult to get that kind of legislation passed. So I'm a believer of we should have our facts in place before we make the big jump, so to speak. And then Arnold's favorite bird, he's already said so, the old squaw. You know, so I use the old name, not the new name. The new name is long-tailed duck, and that is because we have to be politically correct. Like, you think there's any squaws out there that are complaining that the bird is called old squaw? I don't think so. And also, why is the old squaw more of a long-tailed duck than a pintail? It's another bird that has a tail just as long. So, again, old squaw is an old name. It goes way back to the time when people were out on the tundra and the males are courting. They have the most beautiful, haunting quality you could possibly imagine. It carries miles across the tundra. So it's the males that are doing the calling, not females like the most does. And that's where the name came from, old squaw. But we can't say it now because it's not politically correct. Sorry, everybody, that's crap. I mean, there's not a time when you have to draw the line and say, hey, enough is enough. Basically, we go too far. So here they are, 3 different blooming stages, as Arnold mentioned. And this is what the females look like when they're young. And all these sea ducks are pretty appealing, pretty attractive, as you can see, all bunched up behind her here. And who can say anything bad about a harlequin duck? And it's the same thing again. There's not a lot of color on this duck, but the subtle grays and blacks and so forth, and just this one bit of red on the side, makes this just an absolutely outstanding bird that looks so obvious. Here it's not like a zebra. To put a zebra in a parking lot is pretty obvious, but you have it standing in high grass, it's not quite so obvious. So when they're on rivers and in the bush or the poor lit areas, shady areas and so forth, they're not so easy to see. But this is what the males look like, and there they are. And of course, as global warming continues, we're going to find more and more species coming together that were not together before. In this case, here we have red-breasted mergansers. Red-breasted mergansers and harlequin ducks now do occur in the same region, but there are many species that don't, that I'll tell you about in just a moment. Those, and what that's going to result in, possibly, will be new species. It might possibly involve hybrids, for example. You can see here, this is just like the video for Arnold. So if you really want to breed harlequin ducks, you got to have a female red-breasted in there. And so when they want to breed, I've discovered that they're pretty serious about it, for sure. At any rate, so we're going to see more of this type of thing, even though these are species that occur together now. And then the scoters, again, another highly specialized sea duck on the far north. It's one that I've been working on for 10 or 15 years. And we finally have the mold sequence of this guy worked out. It's not been easy, but we're getting there. They feed on mussels, as you can see here. This was the first breeding of the stir scoter, and you can see this is quite attractive, even as a young bird. That was a young male. Then we have the white-winged scoters, again, that Arnold mentioned. This is the American white-wing. There's various types of them. We have black scoter. This is the European black. Different species now from the one that we have over here. This is the American black scoter. I know this is hard to believe that the name that they want to change it to is common scoter. There are 3 males of this species in captivity total. It can't possibly be called a common scoter, in my opinion. So I stick with the old way, the old name, and call it American black scoter. And I was desperate to get information on those species because they nest in the far north, they're hard to get to. I've seen them up there, but I didn't have the food that I needed. And they had 3 of them Patuxent, it's a federal facility, not very far, 3.5 hours or so from my place. So, and this was right after they had hatched out the surf spotter. So I said, Mike, let's go up and take a look. So we did, and what I needed, of course, was some really good images for this book that I'm working on. And this is what happened. Half hour before we got there, in the middle of the time it never snowed, we got this major snowstorm. And I couldn't get a single picture of these birds without snow on them, which I love the picture, but I couldn't use them in the book that I was working on, so I had to go back later and get them. But here's what they did. That's, in fact, all three of them are illustrated there. So that's the entire captive population of this species, and they have never been kept in numbers at all. You see one or two back in the old days, almost always they were oil spill casualties, but for some reason or other, they just have never made it in the collection. But how about these guys? Red-breasted mergansers, they can take a pretty good sized fish, as you can see here. Courtship is pretty specialized with them as well. With the mergansers, I'm spun pretty fast because I'll mention a lot of these. And then the ring plovers, the turnstone, buddy turnstones, and dunlins. The dunlin I mentioned again because it's another one of those species that illustrates what we're talking about when we say withering areas, staging areas, and breeding areas. Their lifestyle in many ways is quite similar to that of waterfowl. And once again, if you, I spent a lot of time with the manager down at his wonderful farm on Fur Island. Step outside, you might see something like this. You're there at the right time of year, you wonder what it is. This is the dunlin mashing up, getting ready to migrate, and this is what the flocks look like. So how they can, first of all, how they can get to where they're going without having already been there before, many of them, pretty impressive, but how they're able to fly in such dense flocks like this without colliding with one another, it's pretty impressive. Take a look. In a nanosecond, every single one of them turns at exactly the same time. Of course it's impossible, and that's the beauty of it. They don't know it's impossible, so therefore they can go ahead and do it. And then, this is just happens to be the purple sandpiper, and there's the phalaropes. You know a little bit about phalaropes. This is the red phalaropes. The females are larger and more colorful. They do all of the courting. Basically, they just need to go out and find a male that will actually pick a spot for her to lay her 4 eggs in, and then she'll go off and find another male. Well, it turns out that the females that get there early get the best territories. So they actually are doing most of the breeding. So it brings, to mind that old expression, the early bird gets the sperm. So, in this case, you can see the male is handling the young. And then cranes, sandhill cranes, whooping cranes, and loons, the red-throated loon, just going through pretty fast. Just trying to give you an idea of the diversity of life. It's going to be most seriously impacted by global warming change, global climate change. There's rock ptarmigan, and I love ptarmigans. I mean, you look at this guy, this is a female actually, feathered all the way down to the toes and so forth. It looks like a really ferocious animal, but they're quite docile. You can see them feeding on the vegetation. There are bald eagles, white-tailed eagles, stellar sea eagles, all of these from the far north, pure falcons, snowy owls, and even gannets, which occur quite far north. We're beginning to see changes. Maybe we've been there all along. We're just becoming more cognizant of them. I mean, I've seen gannets thousands and thousands of times before. To say that up and down the northern part of Norway, the past 10 or 15 years, I've seen some rather interesting change. You can see what a gannet tree kind of typically looks like. Take a look at all those fish nets there, and you think, my God, that's horrible. Well, that's pretty good. Take a look at that. Now, is all this getting available now because of global warming, or climate change? Has something to do with currents? Basically, we don't know. So there are things that are going on that we're trying to get ourselves a little bit more attuned to, but nevertheless, some of the creatures are going to be in good enough shape to be able to adapt. That's not going to be the case with others. We see it with puffins, for example. Puffins, like all seabirds, have ups and downs, ebbs and flows in terms of their lifestyle. Some years they'll be very productive, other years not so productive, so that's normal. But we've had catastrophic declines in the case of the common puffin in recent times, in recent years, maybe the last 30 years or so, due to a crash of their food, basically. Elver eels, that type of thing, are just not around anymore, and that may once again have to do with global warming again because of the Gulf Stream temperatures might be different. The stream itself may have shifted just a few degrees. All of these things are going to have an impact. Well, here you can see the puffins with a strange bedfellow, I guess, and of course they are a species that has to come ashore to build its nest, and they're prospecting in this case, and they might even carry in some nest material. But almost always, you see them coming in with fish like this. They're coming in to feed young. So the young ones are pretty impressive in terms of appearance. They're down in burrows. This is what we just happened to dig out. I did a lot of work in Iceland, for example, with puffins, and this is what the little ones look like. You probably should know that a puffin colony is called a puffinery, and the puffin chips are called pufflings. So this is for your next cocktail party. Thick-billed murres, again, in the millions, probably 8 to 10 million pairs of these. Why should we be concerned about them? Let me just, again, give you another slant on things. Just because something is numerous doesn't mean it's not vulnerable. So you can have millions and millions of creatures, but that can change, especially if they're specialized, very, very quickly. So the numbers themselves are not the only indication that we need to look at. So here the mirrors on ice. They nest on cliff slopes such as you see here. And if you look way up at the top, you can see why. You see the fox up there looking down, trying to figure out how am I going to get down there to get these guys. So this is, again, another form of protection to some extent. And the young ones leap off the nesting cliffs at about 21 days of age. They can't fly, of course, and they're accompanied by one of the parents, usually a male, out to sea. And so far as I know, when I took this picture about 4 or 5 years ago, I'd seen it on a number of occasions. It had never been documented that the young could actually be carried. So you can see this one is right in the back of the adult. Black guillemots, another highly specialized bird from the far north, and very efficient divers, as you can see. Dovekies, 18 million pairs of them. Same thing. If the climate changes quickly, say within the next 10 or 15 years, the way it's been going, 18 million may not sound like so many because it's going to decline pretty rapidly. How about this, the whiskered auklet? Again, another pretty specialized bird. Some that are less specialized, like this glaucous gull, one of the largest gulls in the world, not going to be quite so impacted by changes because it could alter its diet. It can eat just about anything. It's a very, very efficient predator, but it's also very efficient scavenger as well. And you can see that it's working in conjunction with the bears here. And it's going to attack just about any kind of food source. In this case, barnacle goose nest. Well, the geese are not going to take that too kindly, as you can see. But the gulls are pretty wily, and they all end up getting some of the eggs for sure. And then you have something like this, the beautiful ivory gull. And this is definitely one that will be impacted. It feeds almost exclusively on meat, and it depends, at least for a good portion of the year, on polar bear activities, because they'll feed on the remnants of the polar bear kills, such as you see here. So this is a species that obviously is at the mercy of changing times. Ross's gull probably also, Sabian's gull. The kittiwakes, this is one that seems to have benefited a little bit from the changing climate because they've moved somewhat further south, but there's still millions of them in the far north as well. And they're often found in great numbers along these glacial faces, floating ice shelves and so forth, which is pretty impressive. They share their habitat to some extent with the Arctic terns, which, as you know, fly from pole to pole. So they're obviously going to be impacted. And very few birds are more defensive than Arctic terns. He's actually, you see, this tern is actually trying to get under this guy's hat to attack his eyes. So they're very, very much a part of the scene in the far north because of that behavior. How they ever raise any young, I don't know. If you just get near a colony, the whole colony comes up and starts screaming and everything, and well, you know, the eggs and the chicks are exposed, but nevertheless, it seems to work. They'll attack anything, even bears, such as you see. So, and you'll find that a number of species, including waterfowl, for example, will nest as close as they can to a tern colony because the terns will protect them from spockers and things of this sort. So they're working together. Jaegers, another one of those very tough predatory creatures that attacks everything. You can see these, in this case, they're pounding the poor geese, the pink-footed geese, which are just trying to nest out on the tundra, minding their own business. They pound on the foxes, and they drive the caribou or the reindeer crazy, as you can see, ripping fur out of them and so forth. So they're just very, very defensive. So this, again, another species from the far north. It's once again quite specialized. And again, they're not at all fearful of attacking things like bears and so forth. The bears swat at them, you know, like a fly, but it doesn't really do much good. So what are we really talking about as far as changes? What kind of changes are actually occurring, and how is this actually going to physically impact some of these creatures? You can see here, this is what we call pothole country. Lots and lots of beautiful wetland areas, these wonderful ponds and so forth. And this is where most of the waterfowl of North America nest, up in northern Canada and so forth. And of course, this is a prime species that would be breeding there, canvasback, and you can see them in that kind of habitat. So what makes these areas so special is that they're permafrost below the upper level of soil doesn't thaw. So as long as it doesn't thaw, the water that's above in these other areas, these little ponds, stays. So that water is there forever. But if the permafrost begins to disappear, which it already is, then we'll lose all this kind of nesting habitat. This is called pattern ground here, and that's how frost heave causes all that. And again, the same here. So if you don't have permafrost, healthy permafrost, you're not going to have healthy habitat above, which is going to impact nesting success because the nesting habitat will no longer be there. And there's permafrost there. You can see what it looks like. In this case, this is also another impact of global warming. You get more storm surges. The water level is rising a little bit, so you're getting much more coastal erosion than you would have otherwise. Even areas like this, you can see these trumpeter swans here. If there was no permafrost underneath this waterway would probably disappear, which means, again, habitat is being impacted. You can see the forest is dependent on the water, and you can see in the fall it's pretty spectacular. But with less water being held and less rain, for example, there's been more and more droughts, even in Alaska. It changes the makeup of the forest. It makes the trees weaker, and when that happens, they become more susceptible to insect infestation, beetles and so forth, which makes them more susceptible to fires. Everybody's been reading about the fires in Alaska in the last 10 or 15 years. We never read about that before. And that is, if you think about it, probably just one more indication of changing global or climate conditions. There's no question about it that it's most evident in the Arctic regions or the polar regions, but it's occurring everywhere, even on the equator. I mean, even in Ecuador, you're going to find the impact of global change, climate change. Another species that might be impacted, definitely already is impacted, are walrus. This is a smaller walrus, and this is a very unhappy walrus in this case. And they do live on the ice for most of the year, as you know, and they calve on the ice. You can see the young ones. I don't know why they're called calves and not pups, but they have to have ice. Well, the sea ice is what's disappearing now, not the ice shelves, or not the ice sheets, not the ice caps, all the crap you're reading about in the newspaper. I mean, every one of these terms refers to a specific type of ice, but it's sea ice that we're talking about that seems to be the major problem. And if you don't have it, and there's no place for them to go, they start to gather together ashore. Now, walruses are creatures of number, and they pack together in such a way that they almost have to touch one another. So if you have 1,000 pieces of ice like this out there, and there's a walrus up on one, just one walrus, everybody will go there to get a cram it on board. As you can see, they're just piled high on top of one another. But if there's no ice at all, this is what happens. Then they have to start coming ashore. This is not the best situation for them. There are traditional haul-outs where walrus have been coming ashore for years, but these are mostly males. But now we're talking about major portion of a population is having to change its lifestyle and start spending it ashore. So there's something like 75,000 walruses in that bunch right there. It's going to impact other creatures at sea as well. This the bowhead whale. Here's humpbacks and short-billed shearwaters, and they all go to the far north because of an abundance of food. It's an unlimited amount of food, so they go there to take advantage of that. That may also change, and you can see humpback whales right in the middle of this feeding. You have the foxes, for example. Winter fox looks like this. Arctic fox, 20 pounds. It's quite a bit different in the summertime when they lose about half that weight, and they have to go to a different kind of lifestyle, and they'll feed on just about anything they can get. And of course, they have to make a living too. They've got young ones, and you can see here's a young one looking at those harlequin ducks, trying to figure out how they can get down to them. But this is where the flightless geese are the most vulnerable, because the foxes know that, and they're going to jump on them as quick as they can. I watched this fox till it finished its meal. There wasn't even a centimeter of the bill left. It ate everything. So they do that, and you can see that there's more and more interaction now with foxes and the snow geese, because the snow geese are increasing. This is the blue goose here. Another factor that's occurring is the red fox. I mean, you don't think of that basically as an Arctic animal, and it's not really, but it's moving further north. It's moving into the Arctic areas, and it's a bigger, because of the warmer condition, and it's bigger and stronger than the Arctic fox, and it's beginning to impact, at least locally, on Arctic fox populations. And here you can see why they're actually able to kill them and eat them. So that is trying to illustrate the case of the barrier between warm weather and cold weather animals is changing so much that the creatures themselves are moving around. Here you can see the Svalbard reindeer. It's a type of caribou, and then the specialized muskox, polar bear, again, probably the most talked about creature as far as the changes in climate. It's the biggest of the carnivores, land carnivores, 9 feet or so in height. The big one, 1,500 pounds or so. The record is 2,222 pounds. A pretty good sized animal for sure. Great swimmers. We all know about that, but all of the stuff they're saying about how far they have to swim now and they're dying and so forth. Some of that you could take with a grain of salt, basically, but they're obviously going to be impacted by loss of ice. Extremely agile for an animal of their size. They live almost exclusively on seals. This happens to be a bearded seal here, but and the harp seals and the ribbon seal, or the ring seal, those are the ones that are most important to them. And of course, other creatures are going to take advantage to anything that they take down as well. So they're feeding extensively in the spring and the early winter on as much as they possibly can, because sooner or later that food source is going to dry up, and they'll have to go for long periods of time without food, especially when you're a female and you have young ones and you've gone 6 months in that den without feeding and lost maybe 50% of your weight. You can, when your winter is beginning to approach, you know, and the ice is really disappearing, the smart bears eat everything they possibly can. You can see not much left of that harp seal there. This guy easily weighs 1,200 pounds. This is what a big, healthy bear looks like. And this guy's a real porker, too. You know, so we are hearing about are the ones that are stranded ashore, that are going to starve to death. They can't make it. Well, again, there's a lot of salt to be taken here as well. Polar bears that come ashore for centuries, and there's theoretically will keep coming ashore for centuries if things don't change too much. They don't like it necessarily, but they are not so specialized that they can't cope with it. I mean, if you're an old bear and you're just about ready to die, that's probably what's going to happen. But if you're not, if you're, say, you're a somewhat healthy bear, you're probably going to make it. One way to do that is to cut down on your metabolism. In other words, if you sleep 25 to 30% of the time, which they do, that's going to save you a lot of energy, and you don't have to worry about eating so much. And they're not so finicky as you might think. A dead whale, for example, can feed a group of polar bears for a long time, maybe even a year. So it doesn't, even though the meat might look putrid to us, to them it's okay. So that's not a problem here. This is an old bowhead whale here. And there is an area where we might actually begin to see interaction between polar bears and the Alaska brown bear, and whether or not we'll see hybrids or maybe a new species in the making. In fact, it's already happened. Here you can see the brown bears are feeding mainly on salmon and so forth. Polar bears feeding in the snow and ice on seals, which are quite a bit different. But that's going to change if the climate keeps changing. So here you see a brown bear tussling with a polar bear. There have been at least 3 or 4 records of viable young produced by matings between polar bears and brown bears. What does that mean in the big picture? I don't know, but it does mean that there are ways for animals to change if they have to. Here you can see this is a relatively old bear. He's quite an optimist, as you can see, sneaking up on these walrus that really could care less. Sometimes they'll charge into a haul out like this and try to get one. They're never going to get a big one, basically, because a big walrus can take even a big polar bear. So what they try to do is to force them into the water. You can see the pups here are small, and when they panic, maybe one of the pups will get damaged, will get hurt, and that will make them obviously a suitable target. And this is what's happening here. He didn't succeed in this particular case, but you can see the young ones in the water. It wasn't for lack of trying. So that's another way, if you're trapped ashore, that you can survive. Reindeer may or may not be in your area, but if they are, they're going to be something that you can obviously capitalize on. The chances of them actually running down and killing a reindeer are not very good. But they die on their own for whatever reason. And again, carrying for them is just as important as as say a seal. Muskox, they're not going to be able to kill muskox. But in Greenland, for example, wolves are very, very efficient at taking down muskox, and we find lots of skeletons of muskoxes in Greenland and other places as well. And no doubt about it, the polar bears are capitalizing on those carcasses as well. So again, this one system feeding on another to some extent. Here you can see that they've even resorted to going for birds and bird eggs. You can see the bear way at the bottom of the cliffs. It wants to get to the area where there might be some protein. And don't kid yourself, they're very good climbers, and they can get way up these cliffs to some extent. So they're able to do that. Of course, there's a lot of protein in duck eggs, especially large duck eggs like eider eggs. And here you can see them scrounging for goose eggs. This is another interesting situation. You can see the molting birds and the young ones in the front. You see the bear behind, swimming after them. These are all obviously birds that are flightless. That was probably, I'd say, maybe a quarter of a mile behind the birds when they started after them and caught them very quickly. When you remember, this is a bird, an animal that's huge, very efficient at swimming. Their front paws are 13 inches, basically a big one, which makes them great paddles, and they only paddle, of course, with their front feet. So they were able to catch them all right, but catching them is another matter. You might have gotten to them, but nobody ever told the bear that the geese were able to dive, which they did, and you didn't get a water. So if things really get bad, you can resort even to things like kelp, which doesn't provide any nutrition, but it puts something in your stomach. And of course, many of these bears that are ashore, as I say, no matter where they are, they're probably going to die within a short period of time anyway, because they're old. We see quite a number of old ones in our travels up there. This particular one, I came upon even after the area had been swept. Only 20 feet in front of me, he appeared, popped up out of a hollow. So they're around all right. And then this guy certainly at the end of the line. And every year we find dead bears. Not a lot, but bottom line is they don't live forever, and so they do in fact die. And of course, bears are dangerous around humans. So whenever there's a station or whatever, you see these types of signs around. These are the guards that we have, our guys, when we're out with people on the tundra. And polar bear attacks do occur. I'm not going to show you a bunch of grizzly pictures, but be aware that you are always at risk with polar bears, and they can do a lot of damage. And we've been, the last 4 or 5 times I've been up in the far north of Norway, somebody has been killed by a polar bear. So are they on thin ice? Well, I don't really know. You can see them trying to handle the situation. I don't have to explain anything here. The numbers themselves are quite evident. You can see how much ice has disappeared. Now, remember, we're talking mainly about sea ice. That is to say, the frozen sea, not the ice sheets, not ice caps, none of that. We're talking about the actual sea ice itself. And what happens is the system begins to feed on itself, and that's what's been going on. And as time goes on and it's feeding faster and faster, the situation becomes increasingly more risky because of the extent of the damage that is potentially coming ahead. Take a look here. You can see the amount of ice that's disappeared, and it's not just a matter of the fact that the ice is gone, but the more ice that's gone, the more water that is exposed, and the water is dark, and any dark area is going to absorb heat from the sun. So the darker the area, the more heat you're going to pick up. And that's another reason why the planet's getting warmer, is that if you have that area covered with white, that would be snow and ice, that heat is reflected back up. And it's not doing that now because of the situation. Again, you can see the differences between the last couple of decades, how much ice has actually disappeared. That's Greenland, this big spot over here to the right. And that's the sea ice, as you can see there. And now you see what it looks like. It's even less than that now. And again, it gives you an idea how much it disappears. So that's the sea ice situation. This ice can come and go as big or as small as you could possibly imagine. It doesn't make any difference. All of it could melt. It is not going to have an impact on sea level rise, because this is all ice that's floating. So a lot of the stuff you read about how much ice has disappeared and how much it's going to impact the current sea level is erroneous. That's not to say that the sea is not rising, because it is, but it's rising for different reasons. And first of all, you can see this is the thickness of the sea ice, how much has changed over the last decades. It's changed quite a bit. And this is Greenland. And you can see that Greenland has actually an ice sheet. There's only 2 ice sheets on the planet. One is in Greenland, the other is in the Antarctic. Now, all of this ice which may be a thousand or so feet thick, is land ice. This is from the land, so it's fresh water. But if it starts to melt off, coming from the land into the sea, that is going to have an impact on sea level, and it already is beginning to show. And you can see here how much of the ice sheet has been impacted. So that's a different type of melt, and it will have an impact on sea level rise or fall. And in many cases, of course, we're talking about ice shelves. Ice shelves are floating, so it doesn't make any difference how much of this ice we lose. It's not going to have an impact on sea level rise because it's already floating. And we're seeing much more calving now than we ever did before. And again, that's a reflection of the changing times. And you can see it's pretty impressive when these great mountains of ice are just cascading down. So this is on the land now, and take a look again, the same type of situation we saw earlier on the sea. The more ice you lose, the more dark areas are exposed. And those dark areas are obviously exposed, picking up all this heat. And that's just speeding up the process. So many glaciers, some of which I have worked with over the last 30 years, have retreated to a huge extent. You can see it there. It's clear that they're retreating, and they're obviously going to ultimately disappear if things don't change. I should tell you, should mention, you already know this, that the planet has warmed and cooled a jillions of times in the past, and events probably as severe as what we're going through now, maybe not, but maybe so. And when, of course, the ice accumulates, that water to make that ice has to come from somewhere. It usually comes from the sea. The seas are evaporating, converted to snow and ice that falls in areas where the polar regions, for example, where glaciers and therefore build up. And that, of course, is drawing the sea down. So your sea level is dropping. And conversely, when all that ice begins to melt, the sea rises again. So I don't remember the exact figures on what the extremes could be, but I think it's somewhere around 230 feet, basically. So if you're at that level or below along the coast, one of these days you could be underwater. But not going to happen tomorrow. But it's happening much faster than anybody, myself included, ever believed was possible, because evolution, as a general rule, evolves over long periods of time. And in this case, what normally we would think of would take place in hundreds and maybe thousands of years is occurring in decades, and in some cases even years, just from one year to another. But you can see 1941, 2008, the glacier is almost completely gone. And this is another example. There's what we were seeing it much earlier and never realized it. This was a number of years ago when I was working in Siberia. We began to, we're in pretty remote areas, find mammoth tusks like this here, for example, or coming right out of the here. You can see them like that. And that also should have been a tip-off to us, I guess, that maybe times were changing, but nobody had ever been to any of these spots before. This is when Russia was just opening up. So we had no idea of what it would look like 20 years earlier or even a year earlier. So we just assumed that this was normal, and these tusks were visible like this because nobody had been there to see them. And that wasn't the case at all. They're just becoming more and more obvious. There's a couple that we collected, as you can see, and that's another definite sign of global warming. Some of them can be pretty big and impressive. They have a number of them have showed up in these paleo shows, for example, over at Tucson, and that big one you see there sold while I was there for $16,000. So there was a lot of money in being mammoth. And then permafrost, we're seeing more and more signs of it occurring, melting. This is called the drunken forest. And when the permafrost is melting, it's beginning to collapse, and you get all this kind of weird growth. That causes some sense of alarm to us with respect to things like the pipeline. And the pipeline, of course, was built, elevated to keep it from melting the permafrost, but also to allow passage for the caribou, migrating caribou. So if there's ever a spill, this is just a small one, it could be catastrophic. This is just a rendering, but you can imagine what would happen if the pipeline started to fracture and this amount of oil was coming out of it. And of course, it's impacting human dwellings, of course, not just single dwellings, but whole villages. In the far north, for example, all these villages are pretty much doomed. They're going to be gone in the next 10 years or so. So they're almost at sea level right now. And of course, the coastal erosion is obviously having quite a negative impact. Well, that's all the stuff that I've mentioned earlier. So in the north, we're seeing it in the south as well. So quickly, I'd just like to run through a few things for you down there. The kelp goose, for example, a lot of these specialized animals, and ruddy-headed goose, and steamer ducks, and South Georgia pintail. They're a perfect example. You can see getting back at the seals that were pestering it. This is a rat, and they got on obviously South Georgia Island from the whalers and so forth, and they're probably accounting for something like 20 to 30 million seabirds a year if you count all of the eggs and everything that were taken. So the decision was finally made. You can see them, the diving pet down below there. The rats had to go, and this is it's the largest project of its type ever undertaken. I was involved a little bit in the one on Campbell Island, which is quite a significant one. But this one, South Georgia, about 90 miles long, and you can see almost totally glaciated. So with global warming coming, and the rats, of course, are only found in these areas that are not glaciated. With global warming coming, it would open up many, many new areas to the rats where they didn't have access before. So that's what spurred the opinion that we should be tackling this particular problem now, which is what has been done. And I think that they're going to count South Georgia as rat-free this year. You can see again the melting back enables the rats or anything else to get from one place to another. So you can't de-rat one area and then come back the next year and find that it's exposed to an area that hasn't been de-ratted. So there was a sense of urgency there. You can see how far back the glacier has gone. This is a colony I've worked in for a number of years, and when I first started there, that ice was actually down near the water, so it's really moved back quite a bit. But it's protecting. I mean, we had to get rid of the rats because things like South Georgia pipit were really being impacted negatively by the rats, and the ducks as well. And even in the far south, we're seeing it. The Delhi penguins, for example, live in the Antarctic, and they are a species of numbers. For example, this is the largest colony. There's many thousands of them there, and people think that's pretty spectacular, but it's not actually quite unlike what we do. This is where I live in San Diego on the 4th of July, and if you see the finger there going to the north, that's the Antarctic Peninsula, and that's where most of the activity is occurring. And you see all the birds there on top of that snow. They should be on edge by now. So we are in the middle of quite an event in the northwest tip of the Antarctic Peninsula, where many of the birds, many of the penguins cannot really breed because they can't get to their nesting sites in time. And one of the ironies of global warming is too much snow. So how can that be? Well, warmer air carries more moisture. More moisture means more snow. And more snow means a situation like this. And of course you'd say that what's the problem with snow in the Antarctic? None, except that you can't have 20 feet of snow or 10 feet of snow or even 5 feet of snow on top of areas where these birds need to breed at a certain time, because their schedules are so tight that if they're off for just 1 or 2 weeks, they're going to fail. So you can see these guys are ready to go, but there's nothing they can do. And even this is just taken the last year or so, right in the middle of the height of the summer, this is what it's looking like, basically. So those areas already are showing some signs, and many of them try to nest and they just get buried. We dig a lot of them out, of course, but in the long run, that's not going to make much difference. I can say that virtually all of my study sites of Adelie penguins in particular along that area are gone now. That doesn't mean that the Adelie penguin is endangered or at risk, because there's certainly lots more of them much further south. But in this area, they definitely have been impacted. If you have a large colony like this, you have a large perimeter, which means that they're somewhat protected from skuas and so forth, because the more area that they have to patrol, the more difficult it is for them to get to get the eggs and chicks. But if you have a colony that's shrinking, or a sub-colony that's shrinking because of snow or whatever it is, that perimeter of that colony is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, which makes it more and more vulnerable. Take a look at this guy. He spotted one. He dives right under. The bird is doing everything it possibly can. Dives right under it and gets an egg or a chick. There's a chick in this case, and swallowed instantly. Well, all that's doing is just making a bad situation worse. So the smaller and smaller the colonies get, then the quicker they're going to go into extinction. And it's not just because of the climate itself, but it's because of all these other factors as well. In this case, you can see what's left. This colony here, sub-colony here, used to have, I'm trying to remember now, somewhere around 600 or 700 pairs, and there's virtually less than 50 there now. And a lot of that, too, another factor that really is weighing in now is krill. Krill is the major source of food for everything. If it disappears, becomes diminished, then it's going to have an impact on just about everything in the Antarctic. And krill needs sea ice to be successful. And the reason that is because in the spring, when it starts to melt, there are brine pockets in the ice from where the salt begins to, it collects together, and it melts out first, and it starts to bring out algae and so forth that was frozen into the ice earlier in the year, and that's what the krill are feeding on. So if you don't have that, and the krill start to disappear, well, then your food sources begin to disappear for the creatures as well. And even if it's there, maybe it's moved, and if it's moved only 20 or 30 miles, it doesn't sound like a lot. But if you have 2 chicks on a nest that you have to swim out and collect food and come back to X number of times during the breeding season, it can be greatly significant, and you'll find that it's going to have an impact. This is what a healthy feeding should look like. And there's a porker there. They hatch, to give you an idea of growth rate, they hatch at about 86 grams. And they fledge at 52 to 57 days at 7.5 pounds. So the energy transfer is massive. Well, you can see the ice is breaking up here. It takes away their platforms and so forth, and you'll always find penguins up on floating ice for a number of reasons. And if you don't have it, it's going to have an impact. And then just a word or two about the lords of the Antarctic. These guys definitely have to have ice. This is the sea ice here that they're on. They have exploded out of the water. I'm not going to go into the life cycle. It's too complicated now, but you can see where the colonies are located, actually on the ice. So if this ice disappears, it's going to obviously have a negative impact. So this is an area you can see, if you look way over there by the rocks, just to the left, that dark area is where the colony is. And that's where ideally you want the ice edge to be as the chicks are fledging. And just the fact about emperors have nothing to do with global warming and so forth is this is what they look like when they fledge. They're still half and down. First time I saw them go into the water, I thought that I'd spook them in, and I was mortified. It turns out that's not the case at all. This is just the way it works. So here's the map now of the Antarctic Peninsula. You can see it going up. And you've heard of the Larsen Ice Shelf. You can see it there. It's on the left side, or on the right side of the peninsula up there. And it was quite a spectacular piece of ice. This is, I think, is in 2002. I believe it was, I think it was 2002. And in January of 2002, the ice shelf looked like this. and by the 1st of March, that's what it looked like. And the whole thing disintegrated. It didn't break off and float away. It just disintegrated like a Rubik cube, so to speak. And that is, again, because of global warming. And one of the things that you have, one of the impacts of global warming is where you normally have snow, you get rain. And rain is the most corrosive thing you can have on the top of ice. So it starts to erode into the ice and create pools on the top, which of course is going to make it another heat sink, another place for heat to gather because of the darker surface. And then you get to a certain point where the whole ice shelf becomes unstable, and just one more little event is going to take it all out. And that's what happened here. So, and we see signs of this with other ice shelves as well. And of course, people immediately got excited about the sea rise thing again. Well, that's not been a problem, again, because this is a floating ice shelf. However, there is a problem when you consider that the ice shelves keep the glaciers from reaching the sea. So without them there's no barrier, and a lot more ice is now, we're talking about glacial ice, is going to come down and actually be melting into the sea, and that will have an impact. So all of this is going on, and it begs the question is that how much of all of this is caused by humans? And that's not an easy question to answer. I mean, up until about, I'd say in the last 10 years, maybe even less, there was a huge segment of the population, maybe American population, that didn't even believe in the concept of global warming. Oh no, that could never happen, blah, blah, blah. And then to have them even consider that humans might be involved was just off the scale. Well, humans are involved, and the event that we're looking at now probably is a normal warming trend, like I say, that's happened many, many times before. And it probably started about the same time as the Industrial Revolution, so we didn't see the changes so much. This particular event, even without humans involved, is probably a pretty severe one. Will we be able to stop it? That's a good question. My own opinion is probably not at this stage, but here are some of the problems. The burning of fossil fuels, for example, is obviously a major problem. We know about that. Cars running on gasoline, for example, put a huge amount of pollutants in the air. And this is the real indictment, I guess, against the human race with respect to its role in this particular event, is CO2. And we have really good records of CO2 emissions from the planet going back 700,000 years, mostly from ice cores in the Antarctic. You can see what the ice cores look like here. They can measure the air bubbles and so forth in the ice, and that will tell you what the CO2 levels were. And in the meantime, that 700,000 years, we had quite a number of events of highs and lows in terms of temperature, but nothing can match the CO2 levels that we just showed you. They're just off the scale. And of course, if it continues, there's the permafrost again. There are some scientists that will tell us that the methane gas that will be released from the melting tundra will, over time, will be billions of tons of methane. And that's another greenhouse gas. So that means even worse problems. So we need to look to alternatives in terms of power and how we live and things of this sort, if we are serious about trying to alleviate the problem. But we be aware that once a snowball starts down the hill, and the snowball is on its way down the hill, and it gets to a certain point, it's getting bigger and bigger as it's going down the slope, there comes a time that it can't be stopped. Have we reached that point? I don't know. But I do know that for us to just put our hands in the air and say there's nothing we can do about it, and then why try, to me would be criminal. So we need to think about how we're going to alter our lifestyles and what kind of alternatives are available. Nuclear power, we all know, is a great power source, but it is risky, at least in the minds of many, because of the spent fuel that is still hot, but not useful. Well, I'm not sure I buy that. I don't know enough about it to really give a meaningful comment. But if it's still hot, in my mind, that says it probably still has got energy in it. Now, it might be not possible for us to do anything with it now, but we never have had a national program to say, let's solve this problem of what to do with spent fuel. You can always go back to the words of John F. Kennedy when we're talking about going to the moon, when he said we do these things not because they're easy, but because they're difficult. So it's a matter of commitment. We never have shown the commitment to how do we take a power source, which is endless, so to speak, and make it even longer, rather than sit around and lament on what are we going to do with the spent fuel. So that's one way we can consider maybe changing our lives a little bit. This is San Onofre, California. It just closed down, and they're right now trying to figure out what to do with the spent fuel. Well, windmill farms are becoming more and more prominent. This is a limitless form of power, but yet there's still some problems there, at least in the minds of many, because of the number of birds that it's claimed that are killed by the windmills. I'm not sure I believe the figures, but nevertheless, are you telling me that we could spend millions and millions of dollars on windmill farms, and if we're having bird strikes, then we can't build big fences like they do for golf courses, for crying out loud, and stop the birds from getting to them? We know the flight paths of them coming in, and they'll say, we don't mind spending, $600,000 for this windmill, but we're not going to spend for $1.80 for a fence. I mean, if it's cheap enough for golfers, what am I missing? So I mean, that's another power source that we could probably depend on even more. It's not going anywhere. The deserts are beginning to look like this because of solar power. That's another option for it. Geothermal. If you live in Iceland, for example, there's a really good chance that all your power is coming from the center of the earth. Hydroelectric. We just lost a dam in this area, but that's another story. We'll get into that in another talk. But at any rate, hydroelectric power is a very efficient way of getting electricity. And nowadays, we're even looking at things like wave power or tide power. How effective that's going to be, I don't know. But anyway, the bottom line is that the technology is changing, and our thoughts with respect to how we want to live in the future have to change. And we have an obligation to try to leave the planet a little bit better than we left it, although it's pretty bad right now. But that doesn't mean that we quit and just walk away from it. So, in answer to the pressing questions, are polar creatures on thin ice? I would say yes, some are. No, some are not. In the case of the polar bear, is dire, but not nearly as dire as many people think. We're talking 20, 25,000 polar bears maybe. In certain areas, they're definitely declining, Hudson Bay, for example. But other areas, they're not, maybe even increasing to some extent. So I would say they're at risk. So the ice, I suppose, is thin. It's just a matter of how you define what the risk is. So they may have to change. And here's evolution in action. The climate's getting warmer. And of course, if it impacts all of these creatures, well, it's going to impact this creature too, because we also are going to be on the very same thin ice, and everybody shares the same planet. So this, in a nutshell, just kind of summarizes at least what I know about global warming. Try to simplify it as much as possible, and to take a little bit of the scare tactics out of it, maybe put some scare tactics into it. But we are in for hard times ahead, and the creatures are certainly in for hard times ahead. But that doesn't mean it's hopeless. So there might be less ice today, but maybe that will change down the road. So on that note, I'd say bye-bye. So thank you very much. you have any questions, I either put you to sleep or scare the hell out of you. I'm not sure which. Okay, it's just been about 10 minutes. You don't have to stay if you don't want to give you a quick look at what this new book is going to be all about. People have been asking me. So I'm not going to go into a lot of great detail on it, but this will give you an idea of what's coming up. This is a book that is on North American waterfowl. That includes also the Caribbean area and Mexico and Hawaii, because that is part of the U.S. And it's going to cover every single plumage aspect of every species and subspecies of the birds in this area. And I have to tell you that it's a project that if I had thought more about it, I never would have started. It has become extremely complicated. It's almost finished now. These are just some of the, an idea what some of the pages look like. And you can see that just about every aspect of all of these types of creatures is illustrated. And it becomes quite a chore when you think about these are swans, so they don't have all the juvenile plumages in such a way as the ducks and so forth. You think about that all the activity with the northern stuff pretty much takes place at the same time. So if you need to get ducklings and goslings and all of those kinds of things, you have to be there at that time, and that means you have to be in a lot of places at one time, and that really makes it very, very difficult. So a lot of my stuff has been done in the field, of course, but I've been lucky to be able to work closely with Arnold and Mike and Maynard and a lot of people in this room and so forth. So everybody in here might recognize one of their ducks or geese depending on the time of year that I was there. So if you have any interest in these birds, this type of a group of birds, and this might be your book, you'll be pleased to know, if you don't like to read a lot of crap, that the entire text is reduced down to bullet points, which are just 4 or 5 points that you probably need to know about the birds with respect to their plumage and their lifestyle. I will say in the introduction to people, alert them up front, if you're looking for a 10-page description of a wood duck, there are 1,000 books that do that. And this is not the book for you then. So this is more of a visual one. And I'm trying also to portray and project the beauty of the creatures that we're talking about. And I would say that of all the birds on the planet, they're within the top 5 of the ones that are admired most. So there's a lot of people that are interested in waterfowl, everything from hunting to painting to decoy carving to bird watching to raising them in your backyard or whatever. So an awful lot of it starts in city parks. I'm going to have a section at the end of the book on parks and the kind of domestic birds that you find there. And I find this pretty exciting as well. I don't know anything about these domestic ones at all. At least I didn't when I started. And they're not quite the bunch of buffoons that I thought about earlier. So even I'm learning something as we go along. But anyway, we don't have to go much further than this. I'm just kind of give you an idea of what is coming up. And if you're interested, just kind of keep your eye on the websites and so forth. It'll be there. So, curiously enough, the only species right now that I'm missing, where I have no information at all, is the Hawaiian duck. Well, that doesn't sound right, I know, but nevertheless, many people in this room have had Hawaiian ducks in their collections, including myself. But I'm quite convinced now none of us has ever had a Hawaiian duck. None of the birds that we've ever called Hawaiian ducks are pure. So it's a dilemma to me, and I'm going to resolve it hopefully in the very near future. So I'm in the same boat as Jerry's in. You know, I'm suffering through all these consequences of the medical crap and so forth. So if I don't have to go through another cycle of chemo, which believe me, it's really unpleasant. I expect this book to be out in the spring of next year. So, at any rate, I think that's enough. Anyway, it gives you an idea of what what's happening. I mean, I could go through the whole thing and ask you to give you a test at the end and find out if you're really paying attention, but take a look. Yeah. Anyway, I think it might be something you guys would enjoy. We even have the extinct stuff. You won't find this anywhere else, and then the stiff tails at the end. So basically, that's where we are. That's where we are on that. So, any other questions then? Well, sounds like a good time to quit. Some,